Danielle, what's a drug? Tobacco, alcohol, weed, meth, coke. These are all examples, right? What are they? What do they do?
They get you addicted.
Not initially. You know, when kids are using drugs, hey, Javi, they want to get addicted? No. So that's not why people use drugs. Why do they use drugs?
To give you pleasure, make you enjoy it.
That's the answer. A drug is a pleasure-producing chemical. All drugs, to be a drug, to qualify as a drug, you have to be able to show that it makes you feel good. And all drugs make you feel good because they get to the pleasure centers and turn it on. That's what a drug is. And so instead of good food or good sex or a walk in the forest, you just take a hit off of whatever it is, goes into your blood, gets to your brain, gets to pleasure centers, boop, and you feel good. It's free. So drugs activate the system we've been talking about. Now, that sentence, the next sentence is drugs activate the chemical pathways in the brain associated with those feelings. So that's the definition of a drug. And as we said, some drugs activate a little bit, like tobacco, some of it maximal, like meth or oxy or something like that. But they all do the same thing. They do other things, but all drugs do that one thing, and that's what makes them a drug. This isn't just a theory. This is where it lives. In this slide, this is a rat brain. None of you qualify. This is a human brain. And what you've done is divide the brain, so you're looking at it from the side, okay? So like if we were looking at, say, we would be looking at her brain from the side. And if you look at it, deep in the middle of the brain, like really in the middle of the brain, is a part of the brain that kind of keeps an eye on what's going on in your body and in the environment. And something that's pleasurable, or could be pleasurable, this part of the brain picks it up and sends a signal to what we used to call the pleasure center. But we now know that there are two of them. One of them in the middle of the brain. And if this gets active, boy, you feel good. This is a new part of the system that was just discovered. This part of the brain right here, from here, anyone know what that part of the brain is? That's the part of the brain that makes decisions. That's the part of the brain that decides if you're going to do it or not do it. So one of the questions that we need to consider is how come you have a pleasure system? How come you have a pleasure center right in the middle of the part of the brain that makes decisions? It's a good question. There's a lot of information on this slide. Before I go through it, and there's three terms I want you guys to understand. And I want you to say them. The first one is called neuroadaptation. Say it. Neuroadaptation. Say it. Say it. Neuroadaptation. Second term is tolerance. Say it. Third one is withdrawal. Those three words are the problem with drugs. If someone comes up and says, why are drugs bad for you? The answer is neuroadaptation, tolerance, and withdrawal. Before I go through this slide, let me give you an example. Any of you ever been to a really loud concert? Have you? Have you stood near the speakers? What happens to your hearing?
Like it's hard to hear when you're...
What?
It's hard to hear.
What? What? You hear what she said? She said this example, she went to a loud place, she exposed her hearing to really loud noise, and like a lot of people, she realized afterwards she was kind of hard of hearing. And it came back after a while, so after a while, your hearing was okay. But you're absolutely correct. If you overdo it with loud sound for a period of time, you're hard of hearing. You had that experience? Now that's a very common observation. And here's what it means. Built into your brains is a really important protective step. And in the example I'm giving you, loud sound could destroy your hearing. So before that happens, your brain protects you from going deaf. And it protects you by becoming insensitive to sound. So that if you get too loud of a sound, your brain goes, oops, too loud, and your ears get protected by becoming partly deaf. And it'll come back after a couple hours. Now what you need to know is if she went to a concert more than 3 out of any 7 days, 4 or more days out of a week, that temporary protection would become permanent. She would have a disease of hearing. What's it called? Deaf. She'd have deafness, right? So let's start again. She goes to a loud environment. She gets exposed to loud sound. Her brain protects her hearing by basically putting mufflers on. And that, after the sound goes away, it'll come back. She's been protected. But if she does it over and over and over, that temporary protection becomes permanent. She now can't hear usual sound. She can only hear loud sound, right? You see where I'm going with this? Let's talk about drugs. Now, instead of loud sound, we're talking about loud drugs. And let's say, Javier, you went on a big drunk this weekend. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you were knee-walking drunk, barfing everything, the whole thing. Now, if you were paying attention, and we could measure it, if he drank, say, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, way too much, if we could measure it, Monday, Tuesday, probably Monday and Tuesday, he would have trouble with pleasure. He'd have trouble with interest. He'd have trouble enjoying himself. He'd have trouble paying attention. He would be bored. He would be negative. He overdid it. Now, that decrease in pleasure after a weekend of drinking protects you. Now, if he got drunk more than 3 out of 7 days, 4 or more days, and he did it for 2 weeks, that temporary empty pleasure that would be the result of you drinking too much, that decrease in pleasure would become permanent. You wouldn't be able to hear your normal pleasure. You would be deaf to normal pleasure. Okay, take a second, guys. Imagine all the things you enjoy, all the things you love to do, the things that are fun, things you can't wait to do. Got it? Wipe them out. Imagine you could have none of that. It was gone. How you doing? You like that? Welcome to the first day of addiction. Because once you've become deaf to pleasure, you're not normal anymore. From that point forward, you're at least going to be bored. And worse than that, you may be very negative. You might feel no pleasure. So the problem with overusing drugs, you get a lot of pleasure when you use them. But if you overdo them, it takes away from you the ability to have any pleasure. And if you're in my office where I treat drug addicts and alcoholics, it's the saddest thing because they can't enjoy anything at all. At all. Nothing is pleasurable. Except what? When is their pleasure?
When they get that drug.
When they get high. So they come to depend on the drug, right? So let's start at the beginning. They're using, they wipe out their pleasure centers. Now they can't hear pleasure. The only time they get any pleasure is when they use the drug. But it's making it worse at the same time, right? So they're getting pleasure, but they're making it worse. So every single time they use, it's a bonk to the pleasure system. And when they stop, they don't go back to normal. They go the opposite direction. And it becomes the way they feel most of the time. And for those of you who smoke or who smoke weed or who have used a lot of alcohol or used pills, you know what it means to have no pleasure. I mean, you all know it. You've all been there. And it really is a difficult thing to go through day in, day out with nothing enjoyable. Been there? You been there? You been there? You been there? Do you like it? Did you know that? Did you know that drugs take away your ability to enjoy yourself? That you can eventually only enjoy yourself when you're high? Well, let me take you through the science, because the 3 terms we use, neuroadaptation, tolerance, and withdrawal. are the scientific terms for what we just talked about. If I was giving a lecture to scientists, I would say that if you overdo it, in other words, overstimulate your pleasure centers, that overstimulation would induce a change in your brain, and the name of that change would be called neuroadaptation. So in direct response to the loud pleasure, the repetitive, over and over and over pleasure, the brain regions become insensitive. They stop working. They become unresponsive. Your pleasure centers go deaf. And that is the big problem. That's called neuroadaptation. How do you know with one question whether your brain is normal or diseased? Now, I just introduced the term disease. Remember when we were talking about if you overdid your hearing over and over and over, your loss of hearing would become fixed, become permanent. You'd have a disease of hearing called deafness, right? If you overstimulate your pleasure centers, they go deaf. And the name of the state that you're in with a deaf pleasure center, that's called addiction. Addiction is a disease of the pleasure system. You get the disease by overdoing it, overdoing it, overdoing it. So how do you know with one question if your brain is normal or diseased? Anybody know? One question. Answers here. Sadie, what is it?
Try to enjoy something.
Well, that's true. Trying to enjoy something, and you can't. You say, this is a drag. I need a drink. I need a bowl. I need to smoke. Because I can't enjoy myself unless I do. It's not what I'm getting at. With one question, how can you know if you have a disease of the brain or a normal brain?
When you have to keep using more.
That's the answer. That is exactly the right answer. The amount, so if you use the example of sound, what you used to hear, you can't hear. And the only way you can hear is a louder sound. She just said it in the drug terms. The amount that used to get you high doesn't work anymore. She has to go to a louder dose to hear the high. Follow me? Follow me? So she's absolutely right. That's called tolerance. So if you want to ask your friends, you have a normal brain or a disease in your brain, ask the simple question, does the amount that used to get you high still get you high? If the answer is no, it takes me more to get high than it used to, you now know with medical fact your brain has a disease in it. Now the thing that's a bummer about the disease isn't that it takes you more to get high. Yeah, you have to buy more weed to get high. That's not the point. The point is everybody who needs more to get high doesn't feel normal when they stop. They go as low as they were high. So if you look at weed, you get high, you get interested. Wow, ooh, ooh, look at those. Ooh, that's very interesting. Ooh, it's my fingernails, let's see. Now, after a while, if I stop smoking weed, in other words, I have to get more, smoke more, smoke more. It used to be I could take a hit, now I need a whole bowl. Now I need 3 bowls, you know, whatever. If I stop, I don't go back to normal. I go the opposite direction. And from weed, I'll go into boredom. And the thing, I mean, I'm around potheads all day. I treat lots of potheads. And one of the things they all complain about is nothing is interesting. Nothing is interesting. Everything's boring. They can't pay attention. They don't enjoy themselves. They don't want to do anything. Everything's boring. They burnt out their pleasure centers.
You're used to having like the addiction so pleasurable to you. Once you're completely done, it's like you don't even know how to have fun anymore without it.
That is exactly 100% right. You can't have fun without it. You depend on it. The medical term for that's called a dependency. You've developed a dependency. That you can't enjoy yourself because you depend on the drug to enjoy yourself. You're absolutely right, Danielle. You get it. That's exactly right. So if we go back to the pleasure scale, it's what I showed you before. You're smoking, you're smoking, you're smoking. When you stop, you can't enjoy yourself. Now, I'm not saying you go to boredom. I'm saying you can't not go to boredom because the chemistry that will let you get interested is burnt out. You with me? So the sober state of someone who has developed tolerance to drugs, that sober state's not normal. It's the opposite of how they felt when they're high. The name for that is called withdrawal. So once you're tolerant and stop, you will always, 100% of the time, you will have withdrawal symptoms. And withdrawal symptoms are the exact opposite of what the drug does. So if the drug made you interested, you can't get interested. If the drug made you enjoy yourself, you can't enjoy yourself. If the drug makes you laugh, you can't laugh. If the drug made you sleepy, you can't sleep. If the drug made you high, you can't be high. And the dilemma for people who have developed tolerance to any drug is tolerating how you feel when you're not high. How do you tolerate the way you feel when you're not high? Do you like it? You like being sober?
Yeah.
Do you like being sober? Good. Do you notice a difference when you're sober over high? I mean, do you notice a difference in your interest level, your attention level?
Yeah, when I drink, I have a lot more fun.
How about when you're sober?
No, not at all.
Opposite. Bored. Well, that's the problem. Does everybody get this point? I mean, it is so basic. We really shouldn't go any further if you don't understand why drugs are bad for you. Drugs are bad for you because initially they make you feel good, but then they take away your ability to feel good by burning out the chemistry that makes you feel good. Any questions on that? We really shouldn't go further. If you don't understand, drugs are bad for you because they take away pleasure. You get pleasure today, you can't have it tomorrow. If you overdo it today, you won't have any tomorrow. And it lasts a long time before you get it back. Long, 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 long.